everyone. So in this video I'm going to go over the PowerPoint on building credibility and avoiding plagiarism. So we've already talked about using your sources and how to do the citations, what the citations are all about, how they connect to the reference entries on your reference page. But I want to go into a little more detail about using your sources and making sure that you do so in a responsible and accurate way so that you do not intentionally or unintentionally commit plagiarism in your essay. So that's what this lesson is all about. So first things first, we all know that research papers require you to gather and use source material in your essay. That's why it's called a research paper, not just an essay. But don't make the mistake of thinking that your essay should be all or mostly source material. It's still your essay. It should still contain your ideas and main points. I always tell students to shoot, at least for the essays that I have students write. This could be different in other classes, depending on what other instructors require or expect. So you might want to double check with them if you're ever assigned any other kind of research paper. But for this class, this research paper, I always tell students to shoot for 80% of the essay, 80% of the essay being your own original ideas and words. And shoot for 20% or less from source material. Now, if you chose a topic that you were thoroughly unfamiliar with, then that 20% from sources might go up a little bit because you may not have quite as much to say about that topic that you had already thought about and had come up with on your own beforehand. But I will say that if you did choose a topic that you weren't really familiar with, before you really start looking for your sources, you should do just a little bit of groundwork on your topic. Maybe just read a couple of very general overviews of your topic, and then just kind of sit back and think about it for a couple days. Come up with your own ideas about that topic, and then start your research. Because you don't want, at least for any essays that I would assign, you don't want an essay that's just source material, source material, source material, source material. I want to hear you. I want to hear what you have to say. Your sources are just there to help support those ideas and give credibility to the points that you're making in the essay. Using those sources also shows respect to your reader, shows respect to the topic, and it could possibly show respect to opposing points of view. We use sources to establish our own credibility by showing that you have done careful research. So it's important to use the sources. You have to use the sources. But you want to find the right balance between the amount of source material that you're using in the essay versus your own original ideas and words. You never want to go too much with the source material. Use it to simply back up what you have to say on the topic. Okay, So shoot for that 80%, 20% balance. And again, it's not the end of the world if it goes a little bit over that 20 and a little bit under that 80. But that's a good goal, right? Try to have, a good majority of the essay come from you. Just use your sources to support your ideas, okay? What you don't want is to have an essay that poorly uses sources. You do not want a paper that sounds just like a regurgitation of unconnected facts. You don't just want, here's what this source says, and here's what this source says, and here's what another source says. If you're not really tying everything together, and you're not tying it into your own thought process, you might even end up with contradictory information. Not everything's going to go together if you're just spitting back out what sources have already said about your topic. You want to pick and choose your source material wisely and with a clear purpose in mind. There should be a really good, solid reason why you use any information from any given source every time. And not just because I'm required to use 3 to 5 sources. Why those 3 to 5 sources? Why that particular part of that source? There should be a good reason, and it should all connect together. And at the worst, using sources poorly could result in plagiarism. When you write with a good, strong use of sources, you're going to have a strong paper that centers on your ideas. Those ideas will be advanced through thoughtful engagement with the sources. It will offer a logical analysis or a persuasive argument on those ideas using those sources to help back it up. The sources it'll be clear when you read a strong paper that the author has truly understood each source they've used in the essay, that they have chosen each particular element of that source with purpose. They have engaged with that source. They don't just tell us what the source says, they explain what that source says. And they connect it to their own topic, their own thesis. You can tell the difference right away between a paper that uses sources in a really strong, responsible way and papers that don't. How can you use your sources? We've already talked about this a little bit. First way is summarizing. When you summarize a source, you are capturing the author's main ideas, the principal ideas. So if you, read an article that's, 4 or 5 pages long, and the author made 4 main points throughout the article, and each main point had several subpoints and a lot of supporting details, when you go to summarize that source, you're really only going to discuss the 4 main points. All of those smaller details don't need to be included in a summary. A summary is always going to be much, much shorter than the original version. You're just capturing the main ideas. If you summarize information from a source, provide an in-text citation for it, always. You can also paraphrase material from a source. This is where you put it in your own words. So like you have a paragraph or a small passage in a paragraph, maybe like 3 or 4 sentences. And you're going to take that information and think about it and say the same thing in a totally different way. That's a paraphrase. It is often the same length, maybe a little shorter than the original version. So again, if you're paraphrasing something that was, 3 or 4 sentences in the source, your paraphrase would probably be 2 to 4 sentences as well. If you choose to paraphrase information from a source, you provide a citation for it. Always. The third way that you can use information from a source is with a direct quote. This is when you use the author's exact words. Most students go straight for the direct quotes when they use source material. And what that actually shows is that they didn't take the time to really think about what that source material means. They did not take the time to, reflect on it and understand it and put it in their own words. So when I say that, that means use direct quotes sparingly. You really only want to use a direct quote when the author's original words really cannot be stated any other way. When it is so perfect the way the author said it originally. Or if it's a very complex concept, maybe you need to use the author's exact words. But use them sparingly. You really should go for summary and paraphrase way more often than a direct quote. Remember too that if you do choose to use a direct quote, the whole thing has to be in quotation marks, right? And it needs to be exact. Put that quotation mark right before the very first word that you're taking from the source, and make sure you close it out after the last word you're taking from that source. Okay? And sometimes a direct quote doesn't, it really should just be maybe a sentence or just a phrase. It's not often that you really need to do a direct quote for 3 or 4 sentences. That's hardly ever going to be necessary. So try to refrain from using direct quotes so much. Take that information and synthesize it into and create your own version of it. Paraphrase it. But if you choose to use the direct quote, make sure the quotation marks are there and provide the citation for it. Always. So if you've noticed, all 3 ways of using source material, summary, paraphrase, direct quote, doesn't matter. You give a citation every time, no matter what. Always, always include the citation, no matter how you incorporate the material. Alright? So, I've gone on about making sure that you use the sources the right way, that you make sure that you provide your citations. But this whole PowerPoint here is about plagiarism. So what is plagiarism? Well, it's very much directly connected to those citations. Plagiarism is when you use someone else's words, someone else's ideas, someone else's images, and make it appear as though they're your own. It's basically not giving credit to the person who originally created or thought of that idea. It's using source material, whether published in print, in a book or a magazine you can hold, or online. Using source material without acknowledging the source. It could be submitting a whole paper that you didn't write yourself. Whether you had someone else write it, whether you borrowed it from a friend, or whether you paid a website, some random person working for a website, to write that essay for you. Or you found an essay online, the whole thing, and tried to pass it off as your own. That should, all of those instances, it should not be news that those those instances are wrong. It should not be news that it's not right to submit a friend's paper and pretend it was yours. It's not right. It shouldn't be news that it's not right to pay someone else to write the essay for you. It shouldn't be news that it's not right to find an essay online, slap your name on it, and pretend you wrote it. But the technical term for all of those instances is plagiarism. It could be that you wrote some of the essay yourself, but you copied and pasted paragraphs from various sources into your essay. If you don't give credit, first of all, you shouldn't copy and paste that much source material, even if you give a citation for it. But if you do take that information and copy and paste it from a source and you don't provide a citation, that's plagiarism. If you just take those summaries or those paraphrases or those direct quotes, just small portions here and there throughout the essay, without providing a citation, that's plagiarism. Using someone's exact words without providing the quotation marks, even if you have a citation, that could be considered plagiarism because you're not letting us know that it's their exact words. Using the exact phrasing or sentence structure from that the original source uses, and you're really only just changing a few words here and there, even if you give a citation for it, that's still plagiarism. You're still copying too much of that author's original work. And then sort of accidental plagiarism is mixing up the source material with your own ideas, failing to distinguish between the two. And that basically means either forgetting to put the citation in. It's not that you're intentionally trying to pass it off as your own idea or your own words. You just forgot to put the citation in. Or you put the citation in the wrong place. You used something from a source in the first half of the paragraph, but the citation got put at the end of the paragraph. That's not telling us what information actually came from that source. That can be considered plagiarism. There's sort of a spectrum here of severity, right? But at the end of the day, these could all be considered acts of plagiarism. And any act of plagiarism can have really bad consequences for you. So why is plagiarism serious? Well, at its heart, it's cheating. Especially if you're using one of those more severe forms of plagiarism, like passing off an essay that someone else wrote and trying to say you wrote it. That's cheating. Copying whole paragraphs from various sources, and trying to make an essay out of it. That's cheating. You're not doing anything original to that essay. It could also, it's cheating. And when you get caught or accused, or again, if it was accidental, if it gets pointed out that plagiarism has occurred, depending on exactly how severe the plagiarism is, it could result in a failing grade for that assignment with no chance to redo it or make it up, make it right. You could get a failing grade for the whole course. It could get noted on your academic transcript. You could even get kicked out of school for it. Now, for me, if I have a student, and this is why I always ask for rough drafts first, because if I can point out these errors on your rough draft, then you have time to fix it before you submit your final draft. But even on a rough draft, if I have a student submit an essay that I find online, or I find 90% of it online, they will get a 0 on that rough draft and be asked to redo it completely. Now, once they redo it and submit it again, if that plagiarism issue has been fixed, then they get full points for the rough draft. I give them feedback on it, they revise it, and submit the final draft. If it's just, I can see here that this information came from this source, but you didn't provide the citation, and it's only like, a few times throughout the essay, I will not just give an automatic 0 on that rough draft, but I will point out this information came from a source and you don't provide a citation. If you don't fix this, you will fail the final draft. This is considered plagiarism. Right? Other instructors, I don't know. They see plagiarism, you might just get a 0 automatically, and that's it. I try to help students through it and teach them the right way, because this is an English course. That's what I'm here to do. So I might be a little more forgiving of it in terms of what you give me the first time around. Once you turn in a final draft, though, if there is still incidents of plagiarism, it could severely hurt your grade on the final draft, if not result in a 0 on the final draft. So please, just think about how serious it is in that respect. It's also just wrong, it's theft from someone. Someone else came up with these ideas. Someone else wrote that. It's not right to use it without giving credit to them. If you've paid to have someone write it or you copied it from the internet, you're basically trying to take the easy way out and not put in the work that your classmates are doing. And that's not fair either. And also, you're not learning anything if you're just copying and pasting stuff. You're not working on your skills if you're just copying and pasting stuff. The only thing it might do is keep you from having to put in the work. But once it gets recognized as plagiarism, guess what? You're either going to have to put in the work or you're going to fail, and that's that. Okay? Please, take it seriously. I don't know about other instructors, but I actually use a website that checks for plagiarism, and I run every single draft through it. And I don't pick and choose. It's just, I don't even look at the student's name. I get a draft, I put it through the checker. Final drafts, I put them through the checker. That's just how it is. Take it seriously. Okay? How do you avoid committing plagiarism? Well, on that severe end of the spectrum where you're paying someone or paying a website to write the essay for you, or finding an essay online and slapping your name on it, or copying and pasting big chunks of various sources and trying to create a patchwork essay and pretend like you wrote it. First thing I would say there is don't procrastinate, because I think that's one of the reasons why students end up, committing plagiarism so often. They wait till the last minute. The other thing is you have to just know that you have to do the work. It's part of being a college student. Now, in order to make sure you don't commit accidental plagiarism, take good notes. Document everything that you find in your sources that you think you might use. Keep track of it somehow. Highlight, underline, annotate. If it's online, have a notepad for yourself where you're taking notes. This information came from this website. Do yourself a favor and be very orderly and accurate with all the sources that you're reading and interacting with. Right? If you can do that, you've got a leg up on the whole thing, because now you can go back and remember what information came from which source. And at least then you know you won't risk including that information and making it look like it was your own. You'll have what you need to make sure that you cite it when the time comes, right? So the next few slides in the PowerPoint, slides 8 through 13, go through a series of scenarios about whether or not each scenario might be considered plagiarism. So please go through each of those and read the scenario and read the answer. Okay? There's not really much that I could add besides what I've already put in the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to go over them here. But go through slides 8 through 13, read each scenario, and ask yourself, would that be considered plagiarism? Would I think that that's plagiarism? Have I done that myself in a paper? And then read the answer, whether or not it actually would be considered plagiarism. And if you have questions about any of those scenarios on slides 8 through 13, especially if one says, yes, this would be considered plagiarism, and here's why. If you still don't really understand why it's considered plagiarism, please reach out to me so that we can go through it together. Slides 14 through 20 go through other types of source abuses. And this is when, this doesn't really fall under plagiarism because you're not trying to pass someone else's ideas or words off as your own. This is just other ways that we can really mess up with our sources. We've got using sources inaccurately. This is basically where you just botch up some of the words, and what you accidentally put instead of one word totally changes the meaning. So then the reader gets the wrong impression. And you probably used it in a way that wasn't accurate because you changed the wording of it, whether intentionally or on accident, right? But it then negates the source material. We also have using source material out of context. This is where you take just one little section of what was said and you make it seem like the author was saying something else. That happens a lot in the media, don't you think? Probably not. We've all seen it happen, and we all know when it happens. Make sure you don't do it yourself. Overusing source material. This is what we were talking about earlier when you just got source after source after source after source. Even if you're doing it correctly and citing them, if too much of the paper is just all from sources, we've lost you. You're no longer in the essay. It's no longer yours. So remember to strike that balance. Right? Even in individual paragraphs, don't have too much source information. Always begin a paragraph with your own ideas and words, then introduce the source information, and then follow it up by explaining that source information, why it's relevant, how it connects to the rest of the paragraph and to the whole essay, right? So it's not just overusing source material throughout the whole essay, it's also don't overuse source material in any one section of the essay. Plunking quotations. This is where it's like, here's my words, I'm doing this, plop, quotation from a source, and then back to my words. You have to introduce the quotation, integrate it into your own writing, and we're going to work on that. And then follow up with an explanation of that source material. Right? Using blanket citations. I've mentioned this before, but I haven't used that term. That's where, you have a paragraph and you used source information up in the first third of the paragraph, but you don't put the citation until the end of the paragraph. That's a blanket citation. And the problem is that we don't know which part of the paragraph actually came from that source. That's why we put the citation, the parentheses, immediately after the source material that we've used. Don't rely too heavily on just one source. Let's say you're required to have 3 to 5 sources for your paper, and you have 4. But 3 of them you only cited 1 time each, and the 4th one you cited 10 times. You're relying too heavily on that one source. You want a good mix You want to show that you have a balanced use of your sources. Obviously, failing to match the in-text citations to the reference entry, right? Whether that's intentional, because you copied, or you just forgot, or maybe what's in the parentheses isn't matching up to that entry on the reference page, the first word, right? So make sure you're paying attention to that. The last two are more of like academic offenses, double dipping and false staffing. Double dipping is when you use a paper that you wrote yourself, but you wrote it for another class and now you're turning it in for a different class. Unless you have permission from both instructors, you probably don't want to just do that. False staffing is when you turn in another student's work. More so when you do it with their permission. Like, they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead, use my essay. That's called false staffing, and obviously if you get caught doing that, it's cheating. So, double dipping, you're just cutting yourself out of more opportunities to learn new things by using something you've already done. I personally don't have a huge problem with it, but other instructors might. But it's always a good idea to ask. So, in review, make sure that you understand what plagiarism is, how serious it is, steps you can take to avoid it. Make sure you understand why we use our sources, how to treat them correctly with citations every time. How to incorporate them, how to explain them, and then how not to, how to lessen your risk of committing plagiarism, and other ways that we could misuse our sources, how we could just really screw it up. All those other source abuses. Try to avoid those as much as possible. Be aware of them. But that's plagiarism. And I wish I could say that students don't need to worry about it. But unfortunately, I would be lying if I said that. There are always students every term that try to pass off all or most of an essay that's not theirs. Every term there are students that have just big chunks of source material in their essays. Sometimes with a citation, sometimes without a citation. And then there's always the students who are trying to do it the right way, but just get confused, get messed up, get mixed up, get turned around, and that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help with that. But the more you come to understand plagiarism, and the more careful you are about working with your sources, the easier it will be to make sure that none of these things are an issue for you. Right? If you have any questions or concerns about the whole plagiarism lesson, please let me know. Otherwise, you're free to move on to the next thing.